My name is Joy and I'm here to read you a book. Now, I enjoy reading and I'm going to read several books. This one is an erotica book, but I like all sorts of books. I like fiction, I like romance, and I just want to, have experience. I've got so much books, it gives me a benefit just to read them because I don't really have much time to read. So yeah, if you enjoyed the book, just comment below. I only read a few pages or, chapters. And if you want to hear more, I will continue from where I left off. Also, if there's any books you like me to read, you can say. If I've got them, I read them. If not, I'll probably purchase them because I just love reading. And click the notification bell so that you always know when I'm reading next book. And please subscribe. So, I'm going to get on with it. And I'm starting off with a book called The Pearl. So The Pearl is from the Victorian times. As you can see how she's dressed. White corset, stocking and calf-high boots. And author is anonymous. They were had their little sexual things sometimes. And, they didn't really want anybody to know, sort of all very secretly. So they had sort of different poems put together. So, with my glasses on, here I go now. So it says, selection from volumes 1 to 18, July 1879 to December 1880. So, this is quite a few, long time ago this was written. And it's a collection that's been put together. So I will start chapter 1. And it's called Sub Umbra or Sport Among the She Noodle. Now, I am not sure I can say all these weird words on YouTube. So I've decided that for the male's part, I call it Tony. And for the female's part, I call it Sally. There. Here I go. The merry month of May has always been famous for its propitious influence over the voluptuous senses of the fairer sex. I will tell you 2 or 3 incidents which occurred to me in May 1878 when I went to visit my cousins in Sussex, or as I familiarly call them, the She Noodles, for the sport they afforded me at various times. My uncle's is a nice country residence, standing in large ground of its own, and surrounded by small fields of arable and pasture land, interspersed by numerous interesting copses, through which run footpaths and shady walks where you are not likely to meet anyone in a month. I shall not trouble my readers with the name of the locality, or they may go pleasure hunting for themselves. Well, to go on, these cousins consisted of Annie, Sophie and Polly, besides their brother Frank, who at 19 was the eldest, the girls being respectively 18, 16 and 15. After dinner, the first day of my arrival, paterfamilies and Mama both indulged in a snooze in their armchair, whilst us boys and girls, I was the same age as Frank, took a stroll in the grounds. I attached myself more particularly to cousin Annie, a finely developed blonde, with deep blue eyes, pouting red lips, and a full heaving bosom, which to me looked like a perfect volcano of smothered desire. Frank was a very indolent fellow, who loved to smoke his cigar, and expected his sisters, who adored him, to sit by his side, reading some of the novels of the day, or tell him their love secrets, and so on. This was far too tame amusement for me, as I had not been there for nearly 3 years. I requested Annie to show me the improvements in the grounds before we went into tea, saying to Frank banteringly, I suppose, old fella, you're too lazy and would prefer your sister taking me round. I'm too comfortable. Lazy is an ugly word, Walter, but the fact is, Sophie's just reading a most interesting book, and I can't leave it, he replied. Besides, Sissy is quite as well or better qualified than I am to show off the grounds. I never noticed anything. Come on, Annie, I said, taking her hand. Frank is in love. No, I'm sure he never thinks of a girl except his sisters, was the reply. We were now out of earshot, in a shady walk, so I went on a little more freely. But surely you, cuz, are in love, if he is not. I can tell it by your liquid eye and heaving bosom. A scarlet flush shot over her features at my allusion to her finely moulded bosom, but it was evidently pleasing and far from offensive to judge by her playfully spoken, "Oh, water for shame, sir." We were a good distance away by this time, and a convenient seat stood near. So throwing my arms around the blushing girl, I kissed her ruby lips, and drawing her with me said, "Now, Annie dear, I'm your cousin, an old playfellow. I couldn't help kissing those beautiful lips, which I might always make free with when we were little boy and girl together. Now you shall confess all before I let you go." "I've nothing to confess, sir." "Do you never think of love, Annie? Look at me in the face if you can say it's a stranger to your bosom." Putting my hand familiarly round her neck, till my right hand rested on one of her panting gloves of her bosom. She turned her face to mine, suffused as it was by a deeper blush than ever, as her dark blue eyes met mine in a fearless search of my meaning. But instead of speaking in response to this mute appeal, I kissed her rapturously, sucking in the fragrance of her sweet breath till she fairly trembled with emotion. It was just beginning to get dusk. My hands were caressing the white, firm flesh of her beautiful neck, slowly working their way towards the heaving bobbin a little lower down. "At last," I whispered. "What a fine, what a lovely bust you have developed since I saw you last there, Annie. You won't mind your cousin, will you, with everything used to be so free to each other? Besides, what harm can there be in it?" She seemed on fire. A thrill of emotion seemed to shoot through both of us, and for several moments she lay almost motionless in my arm, with one hand resting on my thigh. Priapus was awake. He has his name for it. And ready for business. But she suddenly aroused herself, saying, "We must never stop here. Let us walk round, or they will suspect something." "When shall we be alone again, darling? We must arrange that before we go in," I said quickly. It was impossible to keep her on the seat, but as we walked on, she said musingly, "Tomorrow morning we might go for a stroll before lunch. Front lies in bed, and my sisters are keeping house this week. I shall have to mind the tarts and pies next week." I gave her another hug and a kiss, and I said, "How delightful that we will be. What a dear, thoughtful girl you are, Annie. Mind, sir, how you behave tomorrow. Not so much kissing, or I shan't take you for a second walk. Here we are at the house." Next morning was gloriously warm and fine. As soon as breakfast was over, we started for our stroll, being particularly minded by Papa to be back in good time for luncheon. I gradually drew out my beautiful cousin, till our conversation got exceedingly warm, the hot blood rushing in waves of crimson over her shamefaced visage. "What a rude boy you have grown, Walter, since you were here last. I can't help blushing at the way you run on, sir," she exclaimed at last. "Annie, my darling," I replied, "what can be more pleasing than to talk of fun with pretty girls, the beauties of their legs and bosom, and all about them? How I should love to see your lovely calf at this moment, especially after the glimpses I have already had of a divine ankle." Saying which, I threw myself under a shady tree, close by a gate in a meadow, and drew the half-resisting girl down on the grass at my side, and kissed her passionately, as I murmured, "Oh, Annie, what is there worth living for like the sweets of love?" Her lips met mine in a fiery embrace, but suddenly disengaging herself, her eyes cast down, and looking awfully abashed, she stammered out, "What is it? What do you mean, Walter?" "Oh, cuz dear, can you be so innocent? Feel here the dart of love, all impatient to enter the mossy grotto between your thighs. He has some words, I can say." I whispered, placing her hand upon my Tony, which I had suddenly let out of the restraining trousers. How you sigh, grasped it in your hand there. It is possible that you do not understand what it is for. Her face was crimson to the roots of her hair as her hand grasped my tool, and her eyes seemed to start with terror at the sudden apparition of Mr. John Thomas. This man has a lot of words for this one thing, that's what I say. So that kissing advantage of her speechless confusion, my own hand slipping under her clothes, soon had possession of her mouth, and in spite of the nervous contraction of her thighs, the forefinger searched out the virgin clitoris. Oh, Water, don't! What are you about? It's all love there. Open your thighs a wee bit and see what pleasure my finger will make you experience. I again whispered, smothering her with renewed and luscious kisses, thrusting the velvet tip of my tongue between her lips. Oh, you will hurt, she seemed to sigh rather than speak, as her legs relaxed a little in their spasmodic contraction. My lips continued glued to hers. Our otherwise disengaged arms clasped each other closely round the waist, her hand holding my affair in a kind of convulsive grasp, whilst my fingers were busy with clitoris and cunning. The next name he has here. The only audible sound resembling a mixture of kisses and sigh, till all in a moment I felt her crack, deluged with a warm, creamy spin, whilst my own juice spurted over her hand and dressing in loving sympathy. Don't know what that kind of white stuff coming out of Tony can be loving sympathy on your dress, but here we go. In a short while we recovered our composure a little, and I then explained to her that the melting ecstasy she had just felt was only a slight foretaste of the joy I could give her by inserting my member in her cunning. My persuasive eloquence and the warmth of her desire soon overcame all maiden fears and scruples. Then, for the fear of damaging her dress or getting the green stain of the grass on the knees of my light trousers, I persuaded her to stand up by the gate and allow me to enter behind. She hid her face in her hands on the top of the gate as I slowly raised her dress. What glories were unfolded to view! My Tony's stiffness was renewed in an instant at the sight of her delicious buttocks, so beautifully relieved by the white of her pretty drawers. As I opened them and exposed the flesh, I could see the lips of her plump pouting honey, deliciously feathered with soft light down, her lovely legs, drawers, stockings, pretty boots, making a tout ensemble, which as I write and describe them, caused Mr. Priapus to swell in my breeches. It was a most delightful sight. I knelt and kissed her bottom, slit, and everything my tongue could reach. It was all mine. I stood up and prepared to take possession of the seat of love, when alas, a sudden shriek from Annie. Her clothes dropped. All my arrangements were upset in a moment. A ball had unexpectedly appeared on the opposite side of the gate and frightened my love by the sudden application of his cold, damp nose to her forehead. It is too much to contemplate that scene even now. Annie was ready to faint as she screamed, "Water! Water! Save me from the horrid beast!" I comforted and reassured her as well as I was able, and seeing that we were both on the same safe side of the gate, a few loving kisses soon set her all right. We continued our walk, and soon, spying out a favourable shady spot, I said, "Come, Annie dear, let us sit down and recover from the startling interruption. I am sure, dear, you must still feel very agitated. Besides, I must get you now to compensate me for the rude disappointment." She seemed to know that her hour had come. The hot blushes swept in crimson wave across her lovely face as she cast down her eyes and permitted me to draw her down to my side on a mossy knoll and we lay side by side, my lips glued to hers in the most ardent embrace. Annie, oh Annie, I gasped. Give me the tip of your tongue, love. She tipped me the velvet without the slightest hesitation, drawing at the same time what seemed a deep sigh of delightful anticipation as she yielded to my slightest wish. I had one arm under her head, and with the other I gently removed her hat and threw aside my own hat, kissing and sucking her delicious tongue all the while. Then I placed one of her hands on my ready Tony, which was in bursting state, saying as I released her tongue for a moment, Dear Annie, take the dart of love in your hand. She grasped it nervously as she softly murmured, Oh, Walter, I'm so afraid, and yet, oh yet, dearest, I feel I die. I must taste the sweets of love, this forbidden fruit, her voice sinking almost to a whisper as she pressed and passed her hand up and down my shaft. My hand was also busy finding its way under her clothes as I again glued my mouth to her and sucked at her tongue till I could feel her vibrate, all over with the excess of her emotion. My hand, which was taking possession of the seat of bliss, being fairly deluged with her warm, glutinous spendings. My love, my life, I must kiss you there, and taste the nectar of love, I exclaimed as I snatched my lips from hers and, reversing my position, buried my face between her unresisting thighs. I licked up the luscious spending with raptured delight from the lips of her tight little cunning. Then my tongue found its way further till it tickled her sensitive clitoris and put her into a frenzy of mad desire for still further enjoyment. She twisted her legs over my head, squeezing my head between her firm, plump thigh in an ecstasy of delight. Wetting my finger in her luscious crack, I easily inserted it in her beautiful wrinkled brown. Number 2. And keeping my tongue busy in titillating and the stiff little clitoris, I worked her up into such a furious state of desire that she clutched my Tony and brought it to her mouth. As I lay over her to give her the chance of doing so, she rolled her tongue round to the purple head, and I could also feel the loving, playful bite of her pearly teeth. It was the acme of erotic enjoyment. She came again in another luscious flood of spending, while she eagerly sucked every drop of my semen as it burst from my excited Tony. We both nearly fainted from the excess of our emotion and lay quite exhausted for a few moments, till I felt her dear lips again, pressing and sucking my engine of love. The effect was electric. I was as stiff as ever. Now, darling, for the real stroke of love, I exclaimed, shifting my position and parting her quivering thigh so that I could kneel between them. My knees were placed upon her skirt so as to preserve them from the grass stain. She lay before me in a delightful state of anticipation, her beautiful face all blushes of shame, and the closed eyelids, fringed with their long dark lashes, her lips slightly open, and the finely developed, firm, plump globes of her bosom, heaving in a state of tremulous excitement. It was ravishing. I felt mad with lust, and I could no longer put off the actual consummation. I could not contain myself. Alas, poor maidenhead! Alas, for your virginity! I brought my Tony to the child, presented the head just slightly between the lips of her Sally. A shudder of delight seemed to pass through her frame at the touch of my weapon, as her eyes opened and she whispered with a soft, loving smile, I know it will hurt, but Walter, dear Walter, be both firm and kind. I must have it, if it kills me. Throwing her arms around my neck, she drew my lips to hers, as she thrust her tongue into my mouth with all the abandon of love, and shoved her bottom to meet my charge. I had placed one hand under her buttocks, whilst with the other I kept my affairs straight to the mark. then pushing vigorously, the head entered about an inch, till it was chopped up to the opposing hymen. She gave a start of pain, but her eyes gazed into mine with a most encouraging look. "Throw your legs over my back, my dear," I gasped, scarcely relinquishing her tongue for a moment. Her lovely thighs turned me in a spasmodic frenzy of determination to bear the worst. I gave a ruthless push, just as her bottom heaved up to meet me, and the deed was done. King Priapus had burst through all obstacles of our enjoyment. She gave a subdued shriek of agonized pain, and I felt myself throbbing in possession of her inmost charm. I just want to say here quickly, before I just get back to the story, that, that's why so much things happen to these young women in Victorian times, family, feeling like, shamed, because there was no sex education. And, she had no knowledge of what she was actually doing and could actually get pregnant. But here I continue. "You, darling, you love me, my brave Annie. How well you stood the pain. Let us lay still for a moment or two, and then for the joys of love," I exclaimed, as I kissed her face, forehead, eyes and mouth in a transport of delight at the feeling the victory so accomplished. And there you go with the men, you see. They took liberties with these innocent young girls, and then they'd be all right. But when you think about it in a different way, I suppose, unless they got married, that's when they could release their sexual desires. So I suppose that they practice on with their siblings or cousins. And the men be all right. They could marry, but if the girls got pregnant, oh well. But let's continue this story. Presently, I could feel the tight sheath of her Sally contracting on my Tony in the most delicious manner. This challenge was too much for my impetuous steed. It gave me a gentle thrush. I could see the spasm of pain which passed over her beautiful face, that it was still painful to her, but restraining my ardour, I worked very gently, although my lust was so maddening that I could not restrain a copious spend. So I sank on her bosom in love, delicious lethargy. It was only a few moments I could feel her tremble beneath me with voluptuous ardour, and the sheath now being well lubricated, we commenced a delightful bout of ecstatic F-wording. All the pain was forgotten, the wounded part soothed by the flow of my semen, now only revealed in the delightful friction of love. She seemed to boil over in spending. My delighted Tony revealed in it, and he thrust in and out with all my manly vigour. We spent 3 or 4 times in the delirium of voluptuousness till I was fairly vanquished by her impetuosity, and begged her to be moderate and not to injure herself by excessive enjoyment. "Oh, can it be possible to hurt oneself by such a delightful pleasure?" she sighed. Then, seeing me withdraw my limp tool from her still longing Sally, she smiled archly, as she said with a blush, "Pardon my rudeness, dear Walter, but I fear it is you who are most injured after all. Look at your blood-stained affair." "You lovely little simpleton," I said, kissing her rapturously. "That's your own virgin blood. Let me wipe you, darling," as I gently applied my handkerchief to her pouting slit, and afterwards to my own Tony. "This dearest Annie I shall treasure up as the proof of your virgin love, so delightfully surrendered to me this day, exhibiting the love to her gaze." We now arose from our soft mossy bed, and mutually assisted each other to remove all traces of our love engagement. Then we walked on, and I enlightened the dear girl into the arts and practices of love. Do you think, I remarked, that your sisters or Frank have any idea of what the joys of love are like? I believe they would enter into it as ardently as I do if they were but once initiated, she replied. I have often heard Frank say when kissing us that we made him burn all over, and then blushing deeply as her eyes met mine. Oh dear Water, I'm afraid you will think we are awfully rude, girl, but when we go to bed at night, myself and sisters often compare our budding charm and crack little jokes about the growing curls of mine and Sophie's slits and the hairless little Sally of Polly. We have such games of slapping and romps too. Sometimes it has often made me feel a kind of overishness, of feverish excitement. I could not understand, but thanks to you, love, I can make it all out now. I wish you could only get a peep at us, dear. Perhaps it might be managed. You know my room is next to yours. I could hear you laughing and having a game last night. I know we did. We had such fun, she replied. It was Polly trying to put my Sally in curl papers. But how can you manage it, dear? Seeing she fully entered into my plans for enjoyment, we consulted together, and at last I hit upon the idea which I thought might work very well. It was that I should first sound Frank and enlighten him a little into the ways of love, and then as soon as he was ripe for our purpose, we would surprise the three sisters whilst naked bathing, and slap their naked bottoms all round, that Annie should encourage her sisters to help, and tearing off all our clothes, and then we could indulge in a general romp of love. I stopped at page 17. If you would like to hear more, comment below, remember, and hit the notification bell and subscribe. I have read some of this book, more of this book, not all, but it does get rather rude as you go on. So thank you for listening, and let me know.